The morning sun had barely risen when Clara Monroe reached the edge of Red Hollow, a small town crouched beneath the endless sweep of the desert sky. The horizon burned with the pale gold of dawn, dust swirling around her worn boots as her horse, a tired mare named Daisy, trudged toward the cluster of wooden buildings. Clara's dress, once pale blue, was dulled by travel, and her bonnet hung loose around her neck, letting the wind tangle her dark hair across her face. The town was waking slowly. A storekeeper swept his porch with half-lidded eyes. A pair of men carried barrels from the livery. Somewhere, a dog barked, setting off another across the street. Clara's throat was dry from the long ride, but her heart was heavier than her thirst. In the saddlebag beside her rested a weathered envelope, its edges softened from being opened too many times. The handwriting, Eli's handwriting, was fading, but she knew every curve of the letters by heart. She stopped in front of a crooked sign that read, Red Hollow Saloon. A place like this was the last she wanted to step into, but she had no choice. She needed directions to the ranch of a man named Samuel Hayes. Clara dismounted slowly, her boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. The saloon doors creaked open as she stepped inside. The air smelled of whiskey and smoke, and for a moment conversation died. Rough men with sunburned faces turned to look at her, some curious, others amused. A woman in a traveling dress had no business being here, not without a man beside her. Clara lifted her chin, refusing to let her fear show. She approached the bar where a heavy-set man polished glasses with a rag. "Morning, ma'am," he said cautiously, his tone more surprise than courtesy. "You lost?" "I'm looking for a man named Samuel Hayes," Clara said, her voice soft but steady. "He's supposed to live on a ranch near here." The bartender's brow lifted. "Samuel Hayes, you say?" He let out a short laugh and leaned an elbow on the counter. "He's out west, maybe 5 miles from town. But what's a lady like you want with Sam Hayes? He don't do much visiting." "That's my business," Clara replied, tightening her grip on the strap of her satchel. The man shrugged. "Suit yourself. Head out past the Windmill Road, follow the creek bed till you hit the fence line. You'll know it by the horses. Big herd, white-faced cattle. And ma'am," he added, lowering his voice, "he ain't the friendly sort. Best you knock before you cross that gate." Clara gave a polite nod and turned to leave. As she walked toward the doors, she could feel their stares prickling her back. Curiosity, judgment, maybe a hint of pity. She'd grown used to that look since Eli's death. The widow who rode alone. Outside, the light was brighter now. The sun had cleared the hills, painting the street in gold. Clara took a slow breath, her fingers brushing the envelope tucked safely inside her coat. She remembered the night Eli had written it. His hands had trembled as he pressed pen to paper, fever burning through him. He'd told her that Samuel Hayes owed him money, enough to give her a start, enough to pay the debts left behind. "Promise me you'll find him," he'd whispered. "He's a good man, Clara. He'll make it right," she had promised. And now here she was, a year later, standing in a strange town with nothing but that letter and her name. Across the street stood a modest inn with lace curtains in the windows. A wooden sign read, "Callahan's Boarding House." She tied Daisy to the post and stepped inside. The smell of coffee drifted through the air, and the sound of a broom sweeping across the floor filled the quiet. Behind the counter stood Mrs. Collises Callahan, a stout woman with gray hair and kind eyes that missed nothing. "Well, don't you look like you've ridden 100 miles without rest?" she said, setting her broom aside. "Come in, dear. Sit before you fall." Clara managed a faint smile. "I've come a long way, ma'am. I need a room for the night, if you've got one." "Plenty of rooms. Not plenty of ladies like you, though." "Mrs. Bridges," Callahan said, handing her a cup of coffee from the pot on the stove. "Most women who come to Red Hollow are either running from something or chasing it. Which are you?" Clara stared into the steaming cup, the dark liquid trembling slightly in her hand. "Maybe both," she murmured. Mrs. Callahan studied her quietly, then nodded as if that answer was enough. "Well, you'll have to forgive the men around here. They ain't used to seeing decency walk through their town." You'll find your share of whispers, but pay them no mind. Clara nodded, taking a slow sip. The warmth hit her empty stomach and steadied her nerves. "Tell me, Mrs. Callahan," she said after a moment. "Do you know a man named Samuel Hayes?" The innkeeper's expression changed, softening into something cautious. "I know of him. Lives out west of here. Runs the largest ranch in these parts. Keeps to himself mostly. Some say he's kind, others say he's cold as the mountains in winter. Lost his family years ago, and he don't open his doors to strangers much." Clara looked down at her hands. "I only need to speak with him. It's about a debt." Mrs. Callahan gave a slow note, her voice gentle. "Then be careful, dear. Not all debts are meant to be collected. Sometimes they cost more than they're worth." Clara smiled faintly. "This one's all I have left, ma'am. I intend to see it through." The woman sighed and handed her a brass key. "Room 3, upstairs. Supper's at 6. And if you plan to ride to the Hayes Ranch tomorrow, take the road that follows the river. It's rough, but it'll get you there before dark." Clara thanked her and climbed the narrow stairs, the wooden steps creaking under her boots. Her room was small but tidy, a single bed, a wash basin, and a narrow window overlooking the town. She dropped her satchel on the chair and sat at the edge of the bed, pulling the envelope from her coat pocket. The paper was soft, the ink faded. She unfolded it carefully, her fingers trembling slightly as she read the familiar words again. "My dearest Clara, if you are reading this, then I am no longer there to hold your hand. I am sorry for the burdens I've left you, but I have one last thing that might help. A man named Samuel Hayes owes me money from an old deal we made when I worked the mines near his land. If you ever find yourself in need, seek him out. He's a fair man, and I trust him to make good on his word. Use whatever he gives you to start over. You deserve that much. All my love, Eli." The tears came silently, slipping down her cheeks before she could stop them. She pressed the letter to her chest and closed her eyes. She had whispered those words so many times that they lived in her like a heartbeat. Outside, the town had settled into its afternoon rhythm, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the distant laughter of men at the saloon, the lonely sound of a train whistle echoing across the plains. Clara washed up and changed into a clean dress, brushing the dust from her skirt. At supper, Mrs. Callahan sat with her, filling her plate with stew and bread. The warmth of the food was a comfort she hadn't known in weeks. The two women talked quietly about the town, about the drought that had nearly ruined the crops, about the small church that sat empty most Sundays, and about Samuel Hayes. "He's not cruel, Mrs. Bard," Callahan said between sips of tea. "Just quiet. He lost his wife and sister in the fever 5 years back. After that, he stopped coming into town except for supplies. Keeps his men paid and his land running, but his heart, well, that's another matter." Clara listened in silence, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. A man who'd suffered loss, perhaps he would understand hers, or perhaps grief had made him as hard as the land he owned. When the meal ended, Clara thanked her hostess and went up to her room. The oil lamp flickered on the table as she unfolded Eli's letter once more. She whispered softly, "Tomorrow, Eli. Tomorrow I'll find him, and I'll make things right." Outside, the desert wind howled faintly, rattling the window pane. She rose and looked out over the sleeping town. The moon hung low and wide above the horizon, silvering the rooftops and stretching long shadows across the street. It made Red Hollow look almost peaceful, though she knew peace was a fragile thing in these parts. Down below, a tumbleweed drifted lazily across the empty road, rolling like time itself. Always moving, never resting. Clara pressed her hand against the cool glass. The reflection of the moon shimmered in her eyes, mingling with the glint of unshed tears. Somewhere out there, 5 miles beyond that endless darkness, waited the man who might hold her future in his hands. And though her heart ached with loss, beneath it stirred something she hadn't felt in a long while: hope. Tomorrow she would ride again. Tomorrow she would find Samuel Hayes. The widow blew out the lamp, the room falling into silence, save for the whisper of the wind through the cracks in the wall. She lay down, holding Ely's letter close to her heart, and let the desert night cradle her in its quiet arms. For the first time in months, Clara Monroe dreamed not of what she had lost, but of what might still be found.
The morning sun crept slowly over the rim of the desert, spilling gold across the hills as Clara Monroe saddled Daisy behind the inn. The mare pawed at the dirt, restless but strong, ready for the road ahead. Clara's hands trembled slightly as she tightened the strap, not from fear, but from the weight of everything that waited for her beyond that horizon. Mrs. Callahan stood on the porch with a shawl over her shoulders, watching with quiet concern. "Follow the river road until you see a split fence line," she called. "That'll be the Hayes Ranch. He's a fair man, but he's private. Mind your words and your heart, dear." Clara smiled faintly, lifting her hat to shade her face. "I will, ma'am. Thank you for your kindness." The older woman gave a slow nod, her eyes soft. "Safe travels, Miss Monroe. And remember, not every debt needs collecting." Clara didn't answer. She simply tipped her hat, gave Daisy a gentle nudge, and rode out. The town fell away behind her, replaced by the vast sprawl of open land, amber grass, distant mesas, and the glint of a river winding like a silver thread through the valley. The wind smelled of sage and dust, brushing against her cheeks like a whisper from another life. Every hoofbeat seemed to echo in her chest. Each mile brought her closer to the man whose name she had whispered for weeks. Samuel Hayes. The letter weighed against her ribs from inside her coat, that fading promise of her husband's last words. She clung to it as both a compass and a shield. By the time the sun was high, she saw it. The ranch stretched wide across the plain, a cluster of weathered buildings surrounded by endless fences. Horses grazed in the pasture, their tails flicking lazily in the heat. A tall windmill creaked rhythmically beside the barn, and somewhere in the distance the faint clang of a hammer struck metal. Clara slowed her horse, her pulse quickening. The ranch looked alive. Men moved through the yard, shouting to one another, their laughter mingling with the lowing of cattle. She felt suddenly small, an outsider intruding on a world that didn't need her. But she'd come too far to turn back. Dismounting near the corral, she brushed the dust from her skirt and scanned the yard. A tall man stood by the gate, inspecting a saddle. His shoulders were broad beneath a worn shirt, and the sun caught in his dark hair, glinting off the stubble on his jaw. There was something steady in his movements, no wasted effort, no hesitation. "Excuse me," she called softly. The man looked up, his eyes a cool gray blue that seemed to take her in all at once. The tired mare, the travel-stained dress, the letter clutched tightly in her hand. "Can I help you, ma'am?" His voice was deep, even, but carried a roughness that hinted he didn't use it for conversation much. "I'm looking for Mr. Samuel Hayes," she said, trying to keep her tone steady. "You found him." Clara blinked. Somehow she hadn't expected that. "My name is Clara Monroe. She hesitated, drawing a breath. "I believe you knew my husband, Eli Monroe. Before he passed, he said you owed him a debt." A faint flicker crossed Samuel's face, something between confusion and recognition, but it vanished as quickly as it came. He reached for the saddle beside him, adjusting the strap with deliberate calm. "Eli Monroe," he repeated, testing the name on his tongue like it carried a memory he hadn't used in years. "I remember him. Worked the mines east of here, didn't he?" "Yes," she said quickly. "He said you made a deal some years back. I have his letter." She held it out, the paper trembling slightly in the breeze. Samuel took it gently, his calloused fingers brushing hers. He read it once, twice, his brow furrowing deeper each time. When he finally looked up, his expression was unreadable. "I see," he said slowly. "This was a long time ago." "He told me you would make good on your word," Clara pressed, her voice soft but firm. "It was his dying wish that I find you." Samuel folded the letter carefully, sliding it back into the envelope before handing it to her. "Ma'am, I'll be honest with you. I'll need to look through my records before I can say anything for certain. You're welcome to wait." Clara's heart sank at his measured tone. It wasn't denial, but it wasn't acceptance either. I don't mean to impose. I can find a place in town." He shook his head slightly. Town's half a day's ride back. And the sun's not kind this time of year. We've got a spare room in the main house. You can stay the night if you'd like. Clara hesitated. Pride rose in her throat, telling her to refuse, but exhaustion spoke louder. Thank you, Mr. Hayes. That's very kind. He nodded once, already turning toward the house. Come on, then. I'll show you the way. The main house stood tall at the edge of the yard, its porch shaded by a wide roof. The steps creaked under their boots as they climbed. Inside, the air was cooler, smelling faintly of pine and dust. The furniture was simple but well kept. Everything in its place, nothing for show. Samuel led her down a short hallway. Rooms just here. You can wash up if you need. Supper's at sundown. Cook'll call you. Thank you, she said softly. He nodded and started to turn away, then paused. You rode alone? Yes. A small crease formed between his brows. Takes grit to do that. Eli married a strong woman. Clara didn't know how to answer, so she simply nodded. When he was gone, she closed the door and exhaled, sinking onto the bed. The silence of the room was almost deafening. She washed, changed into a fresh dress, and sat by the small window. Outside, the ranch hands moved like clockwork, driving cattle, mending fences, laughing together. She noticed how Samuel walked among them. No arrogance, no distance, just quiet authority. The men respected him not because they feared him, but because he carried the kind of calm that came from surviving what others couldn't. As evening fell, the air turned cool. A bell rang from the porch, calling everyone to supper. Clara followed the sound to a long wooden table outside, where the men were already seated. Laughter and chatter filled the space, though it dimmed a little when they saw her. Samuel stood at the end of the table. Here's Mrs. Monroe, he said simply. She's staying the night. Show her respect. The men nodded, murmuring polite greetings before returning to their plates. Clara sat near the middle, feeling awkward under their glances, until one of the younger hands, a red-haired boy named Toby, smiled at her and passed the bread. Samuel ate quietly, occasionally answering questions from his crew. His gaze flickered toward Clara now and then, not with suspicion, but with something unreadable. Curiosity, maybe, or caution. When the meal ended, the men drifted off, some to the barn, others to the bunkhouse. The last streaks of daylight faded into violet shadows, and the ranch grew still. Samuel leaned against the porch railing, lighting a small lantern. "Hope the room's comfortable enough," he said. "It is," she replied, stepping closer. The air smelled of wood smoke and earth. "You run a fine place here." "Been working this land near 15 years, he said quietly. "It's all I've got left worth keeping." She hesitated, watching the lines in his face soften under the lantern light. "Mrs. Callahan told me you lost your family." He looked away, the flame flickering between them. 5 years ago. Fever came through the valley, took my wife and sister both. After that, I stopped trying to hold on to much besides the ranch. "I'm sorry," Clara whispered. He nodded once, his jaw tightening. "We all lose something out here, Mrs. Monroe. The trick is not letting the land take your heart along with it." She wanted to say something kind, something human, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she looked up at the stars just beginning to pierce the dark sky. "I used to think grief was a hole," she said softly, "something you could fill if you tried hard enough. But now I think it's more like a shadow. It never leaves. It just changes shape." Samuel studied her quietly, the faintest glimmer of understanding in his eyes. "That's a wise way of seeing it." They stood in silence for a long moment, the night thick with the hum of crickets and the distant low of cattle. Finally, Samuel straightened. "I'll check those records first thing in the morning. You should rest." Clara nodded. "Good night, Mr. Hayes." "Good night, ma'am." She watched him walk away, the lantern swinging in his hand until the light disappeared inside the barn. Back in her room, Clara sat by the window, unable to sleep. The ranch was quiet now, save for the soft rustle of wind in the grass. She opened Eli's letter again, her heart aching at the sight of his handwriting. She didn't know what kind of man Samuel Hayes truly was, honest or hardened, but there had been something in his eyes tonight, something wounded and kind all at once. Maybe Mrs. Callahan was right. Maybe he wasn't cruel, just quiet. Outside, the moon climbed higher, casting its pale light across the fields. From her window, Clara could see Samuel still working near the corral, adjusting a gate even at this hour. He moved like a man who didn't know how to stop, who kept his hands busy so his mind wouldn't wander where it hurt most. She watched until he disappeared into the dark, then whispered into the stillness, "Tomorrow, Eli. Tomorrow, I'll learn the truth." The lamp flickered once before she blew it out. The ranch settled deeper into silence, but sleep didn't come easy. In the quiet of that night, two souls, one broken by loss, the other hardened by solitude, lay awake beneath the same roof, unaware that fate had already begun stitching their stories together, and when dawn would rise again over the red dust plains, neither would be the same. The morning came quiet and golden, the air sharp with the scent of dry grass and sunlight on iron. When Clara Monroe stepped out onto the porch, the ranch was already alive. She could hear the low rumble of cattle in the far fields, the steady ring of a hammer from the blacksmith's shed, and the rhythmic thump of boots against dust. It was a world already turning before she had even opened her eyes. Samuel Hayes stood near the corral, a clipboard in his hand, giving short instructions to a pair of ranch hands. He didn't look toward her, but she knew he had noticed her presence. There was something about him, measured, calm, deliberate, that made her chest tighten for reasons she didn't yet understand. She tightened her shawl and crossed the yard, dust rising around her skirts. "Morning, Mr. Hayes," she said softly. He turned, sunlight catching the edge of his jaw. "Morning, Mrs. Monroe. Hope you slept all right." "I did. Thank you." He nodded once, glancing back at the papers in his hand. "I went through what records I could find last night. I don't have any note of a debt owed to Eli Monroe." The words landed like small stones against her ribs. "You're sure?" "I'm sure," he said, his tone even. "But that doesn't mean there wasn't some sort of understanding. If he helped me out, I'll make it right. I just need time to sort it." Clara's jaw tensed, pride wrestling with weariness. "I'm not asking for charity, Mr. Hayes. If you believe something was owed, I'll work for it, whatever it takes." He studied her for a long moment, the wind ruffling his hair. "You don't have to do that. I want to." Samuel's gaze lingered on her determined expression before he finally nodded. "All right then, I'll find something for you to do." And just like that, the widow of Eli Monroe became part of the Hayes Ranch. By noon, she was standing in the cookhouse with Martha, the ranch's heavy-set cook with a face both fierce and kind. "So you're the new hand, are ya?" Martha said, tossing flour across the counter. "Didn't expect it to be a lady." Clara smiled faintly. "I suppose I didn't either. Well, if you can peel potatoes and keep the biscuits from burning, you'll do fine." The kitchen smelled of bread and smoke, of cinnamon and coffee. Clara rolled up her sleeves, working beside Martha, kneading dough until her arms ached. The rhythm of it steadied her. For hours, she moved between the stove and the table, her hands finding purpose again. Outside, she could hear the voices of men, the neighing of horses, and every so often Samuel's voice cutting through the noise, low, calm, commanding. When she carried the trays of food out to the yard for lunch, a few of the ranch hands looked up with curiosity. "Mrs. Monroe," one of them greeted, tipping his hat. "Didn't figure you for ranch work." "Neither did I," she said, smiling politely, "but it seems I'm learning." They laughed softly, respectful but amused. Only Samuel said nothing, taking his plate with a quiet nod. The days that followed blurred into routine. Clara woke before dawn, helped Martha in the kitchen, and spent the afternoons tending to chores around the house, mending curtains, sweeping dust, sometimes bringing water to the men in the fields. Every night her muscles ached, but for the first time since Eli's death, her mind was still. And every evening she would see Samuel, sometimes fixing a gate, sometimes sitting on the porch, always alone. He spoke little, but his silence carried weight. One afternoon, while carrying feed to the horses, Clara found him in the barn, tightening the strap on a saddle. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing the hard lines of muscle beneath sun-browned skin. She hesitated in the doorway, suddenly unsure what to say. He glanced up. "Careful in here." "That colt's nervous around strangers." Clara stepped closer anyway, her hand brushing along the rough wood of the stall. You seem to have a way with them. They listen to you. Animals don't talk back, he said simply. Makes things easier. She smiled faintly. I don't believe that. I think they just listen better than people do. He gave her a quiet look, something flickering in his eyes. Something close to amusement, but gentler. You might be right. There was a long silence between them, the kind that wasn't uncomfortable, just heavy with things neither dared to say. Clara cleared her throat. Did you ever marry again? Samuel's hands stilled. No, once was enough. I'm sorry, he shrugged, though his voice softened. Don't be. We loved while we had the chance. Life took her early, that's all. Same with my sister. They're buried out by the willow tree past the ridge. She lowered her gaze. I know what it's like, to lose everything that made a house feel like home. For a moment, neither spoke. Dust motes drifted in the light, spilling through the barn doors. Then Samuel said quietly, You're doing good work here, Mrs. Monroe. You don't owe me anything. I said I'd earn what's owed, she replied firmly. I meant it. He studied her again, his gaze steady but softer than before. You've got Eli's spirit, stubborn but decent. Her throat tightened. He spoke highly of you, you know. That's so? Yes. Said you were a fair man. Said he trusted you. Samuel's eyes darkened at that. Then I hope I don't give him reason to regret it. When he turned back to the saddle, Clara lingered a moment longer before stepping away, her heart beating strangely fast. As the days stretched into weeks, the distance between them began to shrink, not in words but in gestures. Samuel would fix the hinge on her door without being asked. She'd leave a cup of coffee waiting for him when he came in late from the fields. Small, quiet kindnesses that neither acknowledged aloud. One evening a storm rolled in from the mountains, turning the sky black and alive with thunder. The wind howled through the valley, rattling the windows of the ranch house. Samuel came in soaked, pulling off his hat and shaking out the rain. Cattle spooked near the creek, he said, his voice rough from shouting over the wind. Lost a few fence posts. You're drenched, Clara said, rushing to grab a towel. You'll catch your death if you don't change. He gave a tired half-smile. I've caught worse. Sit, she ordered, her tone leaving no room for argument. I'll get you something hot. Martha had long gone to bed, so Clara set about reheating stew, the lantern light flickering against the walls. When she placed the bowl in front of him, his eyes met hers, tired but grateful. Thank you, he said quietly. They ate in silence, the sound of rain pounding on the roof above them. When he finally set the spoon down, he leaned back, studying her across the table. You don't scare easy, he said. I've had my share of storms. Still, most folks wouldn't ride across half the desert chasing an old debt. She smiled faintly. Maybe I'm foolish, or maybe I just needed something to hold on to. He nodded slowly, as if he understood exactly what she meant. The storm raged for hours, but when it finally passed, the world outside felt washed clean. Samuel rose, walking her to the doorway. Good night, Mrs. Monroe, he said softly. Good night, Mr. Hayes. She hesitated, then added, You can call me Clara. A small smile tugged at his mouth. Then you best call me Samuel. The sound of her name and his voice stayed with her long after she'd gone to bed. Days later, she found herself laughing again. Real laughter, the kind she hadn't felt since before Eli's death. It happened when she was carrying a pail of water and slipped on the mud near the barn, splashing both herself and Toby, the young ranch hand. Samuel happened to walk by just in time to see it, and for the first time she heard him laugh, deep, warm, startled out of him like sunlight breaking through clouds. Guess we both needed that, he said, handing her a clean towel. Clara wiped her face, smiling. Maybe we did. After that day, something changed. Their conversations grew easier. In the evenings, they'd sit on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the hills. Sometimes they spoke of simple things, the price of feed, the stubbornness of mules. But sometimes the talk turned softer. She told him about Eli, the laughter they'd shared, the dreams they'd had of buying a small plot of land. He listened quietly, never interrupting, only nodding in that thoughtful way of his. And though she didn't say it aloud, She could feel the weight inside her beginning to lift. One evening, when the air was cool and the sky streaked in pink and gold, Samuel brought out an old fiddle. "Haven't played in years," he said. "Used to be my sister's." Clara sat on the steps, watching as he drew the bow across the strings. The sound was rough at first, then steady, the melody tender and aching. It filled the air like a memory made of light. When he finished, she whispered, "That was beautiful." He looked at her, a faint smile softening the hard lines of his face. "You make it sound better just by listening." Her heart fluttered. "You give it life just by playing." They fell quiet again, the silence between them full of something gentle and unspoken. That night, Clara lay awake long after the lamps had gone dark, the echo of his music still lingering in her chest. She thought of Eli, of promises and debts, of the strange way life could wound and heal at the same time. And when she finally drifted into sleep, it was with a peace she hadn't known since her husband's last breath. Out in the fields, the moon hung silver over the land, casting long shadows across the ranch that had begun to feel, against all odds, a little like home. Samuel sat alone on the porch, hat in his hand, staring toward her window where the lamp had gone dark. His expression was unreadable, but his heart was no longer quiet. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in years, he found himself hoping for it to come. The morning broke soft and clear, the kind of light that turned the fields gold and made even the rough edges of the world seem kind for a while. Clara Monroe stood on the porch, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, watching the haze lift off the land. The air smelled of dew and wild sage. Somewhere far out in the pasture, she could hear the distant hum of cattle and the low whistle of the ranch hands calling to one another. Behind her, the screen door creaked open. Samuel stepped out, rolling his sleeves up to his elbows, his hair damp from washing. The quiet between them was familiar now, almost comfortable. She'd grown used to the weight of his silence, the way it said everything words couldn't. "Mornin'," he said, his voice still rough from sleep. "Morning," she replied softly. "You've been up a while." "I like watching the light change," she smiled faintly. "Makes the world feel new, even when it isn't." He gave a small nod, sipping his own coffee. The silence stretched, filled with the hum of waking earth. There was a peace to mornings like this, a peace Clara had almost forgotten how to feel. Over the weeks, she had come to know every corner of the ranch, the sound the windmill made when the breeze turned just right, the way the horses kicked at dusk when the air cooled, the exact tone of Samuel's voice when he called her name across the yard. It had all settled into her bones like a rhythm she couldn't help but follow. But peace was a fragile thing, and that day it would crack like thin glass beneath the weight of truth. Around noon, a wagon rattled up the dirt road toward the ranch. Dust rose in thick clouds behind it, and the horses snorted as they came to a stop near the porch. A tall man in a gray vest climbed down, brushing off his hat. "Afternoon," he called, his voice carrying over the sound of hooves. "Mr. Hayes, you around?" Samuel looked up from the corral, frowning slightly. "What brings you out here, Mr. Larkin?" The man grinned politely, though his eyes were all business. "Paperwork. I'm closing the ledgers from the old mining accounts. Thought I'd settle a few final details. Got your name listed on a payout from a few years back. Something about medical debts." Clara froze. The words struck her like a sharp wind. She turned slowly, her heart thudding in her chest. Samuel's face changed, just barely, but she caught it. The flicker of discomfort, the tightening of his jaw. Larkin pulled a small ledger from his satchel, flipping through pages. "Says here you settled hospital fees for a miner named Eli Monroe. Amount paid in full, signed and recorded. That ring a bell?" Samuel's voice came low. "Yes, I remember." Clara's breath caught. "What did you just say?" Both men turned toward her. Samuel's expression softened, but the silence between them was already too loud. Larkin glanced between them awkwardly. "Beg pardon, ma'am. I didn't mean to." "It's fine," Clara said, her voice sharp but trembling. She stepped closer to Samuel, her eyes blazing with hurt. "He said you owed him money." Samuel sighed quietly. "Clara." "No." she interrupted, the word cracking like a whip. "You mean to tell me all this time? It was you who paid his debts." He didn't answer right away, just looked at her with that same quiet steadiness he always had. But she saw the truth in his eyes long before he spoke. "I didn't want you to know," he said finally. "Your husband was a good man. He got hurt bad in that mine, and the hospital wouldn't take him without payment. I had the means, so I paid it, didn't ask for anything back." "Why?" she demanded. "Why would you do that and then let me come here thinking you owed us?" "I didn't plan on you finding me," he said softly. "When you showed up, He stopped, searching for words. "You'd lost so much already. I didn't want to take away the last thing you were holding on to." Clara felt her throat tighten. "So you lied." "I kept quiet," he corrected gently. "There's a difference." Her hands trembled as she stepped back, the warmth she'd built in her heart for this place, for him, twisted into confusion and shame. "You let me work here. You let me think I was earning what was mine." "I didn't do it to humiliate you," he said, his voice rough. "I did it because I didn't want to see you break any more than you already had." The kindness in his tone only made the ache sharper. Clara turned away, blinking hard against the tears. "Do you have any idea how small that makes me feel?" He took a slow step toward her. "Clara, don't," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Don't say my name like that." Mr. Larkin shifted awkwardly beside them. "Maybe I should." "Go," Samuel said quietly. The man tipped his hat and climbed back onto his wagon. The wheels creaked as they rolled away, leaving only the sound of the wind scraping through the dry grass. Clara's chest heaved with emotion. "You could have told me the truth from the start. I would have understood." "I didn't think you would," he said honestly. "You needed a reason to stay. I gave you one." Her heart broke at the simplicity of it. "You pitied me." "I cared for you," he said, his voice rising for the first time. "That's the truth of it. You think I liked watching you work yourself to the bone to pay back something that was never owed. You think it didn't eat at me every damn day." The rawness in his tone silenced her. But she was too hurt to let it reach her. "You had no right." "You're right," he admitted. "But if I had told you the truth, you would have ridden off that first morning and never looked back." "Maybe I should have." The words hit him like a slap, and for a long moment neither spoke. The sound of the windmill turning was the only thing between them. Finally she turned, tears cutting paths down her dusty cheeks. "I'll leave in the morning. You won't have to be burdened by me anymore, Clara, please," he said quietly, stepping forward, but she backed away. "Don't," she whispered again. "You've done enough." She turned and walked toward the house, her figure trembling in the fading light. Samuel stood where she'd left him, hands clenched at his sides, his heart heavy with everything he hadn't meant to destroy. The sun dipped low behind the hills, setting the world on fire with color. Somewhere in the fields, a shout broke the stillness. Sharp, panicked, Samuel's head snapped up. "The bull's loose!" Toby's voice rang out from the pasture. Without thinking, Samuel bolted toward the corral, his boots kicking up dust. A massive brown bull had broken through the fence, its horns gleaming as it charged across the open field toward two ranch hands trying to scatter the cattle. "Get back!" Samuel shouted, grabbing a rope from the post. Clara heard the commotion from inside the house. She rushed out, her heart pounding. "Samuel!" The bull lunged, snorting, tearing at the ground. Samuel swung the rope, catching one horn, trying to pull its head aside. The rope snapped taut, yanking him forward. He dug his boots in, muscles straining, trying to steer the beast away from the men. "Samuel, look out!" Toby yelled, but the warning came too late. The bull twisted violently, breaking free of the rope. Its horn caught Samuel in the side, throwing him hard to the ground. "Samuel!" Clara screamed, running toward him as the ranch hands fired shots into the air to drive the bull off. The animal snorted, stomped once, and bolted back toward the hills. When the dust settled, Clara fell to her knees beside him. Blood stained his shirt, dark and spreading fast. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused. "Don't move," she whispered, pressing her hand to his wound. "Please, don't move." He tried to speak, but the words came weak. "You shouldn't be here." "Be quiet," she said, her voice shaking. "You're gonna be fine. You hear me? You're gonna be fine." He gave a faint, broken smile. "Stubborn, just like I said." Her tears fell freely now, mixing with the dust on his face. "Don't talk like that. Don't you dare." Toby and another hand ran up with a blanket and water. Together they carried Samuel into the house, laying him on the bed. Clara stayed by his side, refusing to leave. The rest of the night blurred into a haze of fear and prayer. She cleaned the wound, stitched it with trembling hands, and pressed cool cloths against his fevered skin. Every time his breath hitched, she whispered his name, her voice cracking on it. At some point near dawn, he stirred, his voice barely a whisper. "Clara." She leaned close, clutching his hand. "I'm here." He looked at her with glassy eyes, pain and apology tangled in them. "Didn't lie to hurt you. I just wanted you to stay." Her throat closed around a sob. "Then why didn't you just say that?" His breath came shallow. "Didn't think I deserved it." "Samuel, please," she whispered. "Don't talk like that. You hear me? You can't leave me. Not now." His hand brushed weakly against her cheek, smearing dust and tears. "You're stronger than you know." "Then you better live long enough to see it," she said fiercely. He gave a faint smile, his eyelids fluttering closed. She stayed like that for hours, watching the rise and fall of his chest, whispering his name every time it slowed. The morning light crept through the curtains, painting his face in gold. For the first time, Clara understood what she'd been blind to all along. The debt she had come to collect had never been about money. It had been about the ache in her chest that found its echo in his. When the sun finally rose, she was still sitting beside him, her fingers entwined with his, her heart finally admitting what her mind had fought to deny. She loved him, and she would not let him go. The sun rose slow over the valley that morning, spilling pale light through the thin curtains of Samuel Hayes's room. The world outside was quiet, too quiet. The ranch that usually woke with the sound of boots, laughter, and the ring of tools was hushed, as if the earth itself were holding its breath. Clara sat beside the bed, her fingers wrapped around Samuel's hand, her eyes red and heavy from a night without sleep. The fever had come and gone in waves. Every time his breathing faltered, her heart stopped with it. But he was still there, still fighting. His hand was warm against hers, though his skin was pale as ash. She hadn't left his side since the moment he'd fallen. Martha had tried to pull her away to eat or rest, but Clara refused. She'd lost one man to the silence once before. She wouldn't lose another. Outside the window, a breeze stirred the curtains, carrying in the faint scent of wet earth. The storm from 2 nights ago had broken the long, dry spell, and now the land smelled of life again. Clara looked toward it for a moment, her eyes soft with exhaustion, then turned back to Samuel. "You stubborn fool," she whispered, her voice cracking with affection. "You didn't have to be the one to get hurt." His chest rose faintly, a breath caught between pain and sleep. She brushed the hair back from his forehead and dipped the cloth in the basin again, laying it gently across his brow. As she did, she thought of Eli, his laugh, his promises, his final words. She'd loved him truly, and losing him had hollowed her out. But what she felt now, sitting here with Samuel, was something different. It was heavier, deeper, not the fire of youth, but the steady warmth of something that had been forged through loss. She didn't know when it had started, maybe the night he'd played the fiddle, or the first time she'd heard him laugh. But somewhere between anger and forgiveness, her heart had found its way back to life. The door opened softly behind her. Martha stepped in, her apron dusted with flour, worry etched in her face. "Any change?" she asked. Clara shook her head. "He's holding on." Martha set a tray on the table. Bread, coffee, a bit of broth. "You need to eat, dear. Can't help him if you fall apart." Clara smiled faintly. "I will, I promise. Just not yet." The older woman sighed but didn't argue. She looked at Samuel's still form, her voice softening. "He's a strong one." Been through worse than most men could bear, he'll find his way back. I hope you're right. When Martha left, Clara leaned forward, pressing her forehead against Samuel's hand. You've carried enough pain for one life, she whispered. Let me carry some of it now. Hours passed. The light shifted from gold to white, and then to the warm orange of afternoon. Clara read aloud to him from an old book she'd found on the shelf, her voice low and even, as if the sound itself might anchor him to the world. She didn't notice when his fingers moved. It was only a slight twitch, but it stopped her breath cold. She looked down, and then his hand squeezed hers, faint but certain. "Samuel?" she whispered. His eyelids fluttered. His voice was weak, rough like gravel. "You never stop talking, do you?" A sound between a laugh and a sob broke from her throat. "Don't you dare make jokes right now," she said, tears spilling over. He smiled faintly, eyes half open. "You were crying." "Of course I was crying," she said, gripping his hand tighter. "You scared me half to death." "Didn't mean to," he murmured. She leaned closer, brushing her fingers over his cheek. "You shouldn't have gone after that bull." He managed a breath that might have been a laugh. "Couldn't let the boys get hurt. You could have died." "Wouldn't be the first time I flirted with it," he said, then winced as pain rippled through him. "Don't talk," she whispered quickly. "Just rest." But his gaze caught hers, steady even through the pain. "Clara, there's something I need to say." "Later." "No, now." His hand trembled, but his grip on hers was firm. "I never wanted to lie to you. When I helped Eli, I didn't do it to make you feel small. I did it because I saw a man worth helping. And because I couldn't bear the thought of what would happen to you if I didn't." Tears welled again in her eyes, hot and unbidden. "You should have told me." "I wanted to," he said softly. "But when you showed up here, it felt like maybe I had a chance to make something right in this world. And then I saw you smile for the first time, and I didn't want it to end." Her heart twisted. "Samuel," he closed his eyes briefly, the effort of speaking wearing on him. "I thought if I told you the truth, you'd leave, and the ranch would be quiet again. Too quiet." Clara's hand trembled against his. "You think I stayed because of a debt?" He opened his eyes again, weak but steady. "Didn't know why you stayed, only that I was grateful you did." She swallowed hard, her throat tight with emotion. "I stayed because you gave me something I didn't think I'd ever have again." "What's that?" "Peace," she whispered. For a long moment, neither spoke. The air between them was full of everything they couldn't say. Regret, forgiveness, love, all tangled together. Then Samuel smiled faintly. "Guess I owe you then." Clara laughed softly through her tears. "No, Samuel, that's not how this works anymore." He blinked slowly, exhaustion tugging at him. "Then tell me how it works." She brushed her thumb along his knuckles, her voice tender. "You rest, you heal, and when you're strong enough, you come outside and watch the sunset with me. That's how it works." He managed a slow nod. "I think I can do that." When his eyes finally closed again, it wasn't from weakness. It was rest, deep and calm. For the first time since the accident, his breathing was steady, his color returning. Clara stayed there long after, holding his hand until the shadows lengthened and the world turned quiet again. Days passed. Samuel's strength returned bit by bit. The ranch hands checked in often, bringing flowers or notes of good humor. Martha fussed over him like a mother hen, but it was Clara who never strayed far. She read to him, helped him walk again, laughed when he grumbled about the fussing. One evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, Samuel sat on the porch, a blanket over his lap, and Clara beside him. The air was soft and warm, filled with the scent of lilac and sage. He watched the sky turn from gold to violet. "Never noticed how quiet sunset is," he said. "That's because you never stop working long enough to listen," Clara teased gently. he smiled. Maybe I needed someone to make me stop. She looked at him, her eyes glowing in the fading light. And maybe I needed someone who'd make me stay. He turned to face her fully. I'm glad you did. Silence settled again, but it wasn't empty. It was full, alive with the sound of crickets and the slow rhythm of their hearts finding the same beat. After a moment, Samuel spoke again, his voice low. Clara, I've spent most of my life owing people things I could never repay. Favors, chances, forgiveness. But you, he paused, shaking his head with a soft smile. You're the first thing I've ever been given that feels like grace. She felt the tears return, not from sadness, but from the fullness of it. You don't owe me anything, Samuel. You never did. He reached for her hand, his thumb tracing the back of it gently. Maybe not, but I still want to spend what's left of my days trying to deserve you. She laughed softly, tears catching in her lashes. You already do. The wind lifted the edge of her shawl, carrying the faint scent of rain. The last light of day stretched across the land, painting the fields in gold. Samuel leaned forward slightly, his eyes searching hers. Clara, he said, voice almost a whisper, stay. Not because of a debt or because you think you have to. Stay because you want to. Her heart swelled so full it hurt. I already decided that, Samuel Hayes. And before he could say another word, she closed the space between them. The kiss was slow, tender, the kind that didn't ask or demand. It simply was. The world around them seemed to still, the ranch, the fields, the sky itself holding its breath as two lives, long haunted by loss, found their way home to one another. When they finally pulled apart, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. You sure about this? He murmured. She smiled, her eyes glistening. I've never been more sure of anything. The stars began to bloom above them, bright and endless. They sat there in the quiet, fingers entwined, the world vast and open before them. For Clara, the journey that began with a letter and a debt had ended not in payment, but in something far richer, a heart mended, a soul reborn, and a love that asked for nothing but to be shared. Samuel watched her, his voice barely above a whisper. Maybe the only debt left between us is love? Clara leaned her head against his shoulder, smiling through her tears. Then I'll spend the rest of my life paying it. And as the wind swept softly across the plains, the ranch settled into its quiet rhythm again. No longer a place of ghosts and grief, but of laughter, forgiveness, and the sound of two hearts finally at peace. Under the wide, endless western sky, Clara Monroe and Samuel Hayes sat together, not as strangers bound by loss, but as souls who had found, at last, what every weary traveler hopes to find, a home. In the wide silence of the frontier, she came to collect a debt, but found something far greater than gold. Two hearts, both scarred by loss, learned that love isn't something owed. It's something freely given. And beneath the endless western sky, Clara Monroe and Samuel Hayes discovered that sometimes the truest kind of redemption isn't found in what we take, but in what we choose to give back. If you enjoyed this story of love, forgiveness, and second chances, don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Love Chronicles, where every tale rides on the wind of passion, fate, and the untamed heart of the Old West. Hit that bell icon so you never miss another story that'll steal your breath, and maybe your heart too.